Good afternoon from Helsinki, Finland, and welcome to this webinar entitled Men and Manhood in Crisis. This webinar is the second event of a webinar series called On Men and Masculinities from Change and Crisis to Empowerment, which is organized by the Council for Gender Equality and the Central Association of Men's Organizations in Finland and funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers. My name is Taina Riski, and next to me is
Joonas Kekkonen.
And we will be moderating today's event together. You can now see the program on the screen, but before we get started, I would like to go over a few practical issues. First of all, we encourage you to make comments and ask questions related to today's topics by using the chat box available on the screen. So feel free even just to say hello and tell us where you're from. We do have a great turnout for this event, around 220 registered participants, so we're looking forward to interesting discussions in the chat alone. The same way as in the previous event, we have dedicated a good amount of time for discussion in the end of the program, so we will be able to take up a few questions also from the chat. However, due to the great number of participants, we might not be able to provide airtime to all of your questions. Another practical note, we will also take a small break after the second speaker and will notify you on the screen when the time comes. And lastly, this event will be recorded and the recording will be available on the YouTube channel of the Council for Gender Equality. And if you have any practical questions or queries about the program or webinar series, just use the chat for that purpose. And perhaps now a few words about the content. Joonas.
Thank you. Yes, overall, the aim of this webinar series is to spark debate and to share knowledge among researchers, policymakers, and civil society representatives about men and masculinities in relation to gender equality in Nordic and Baltic countries and beyond. At the moment, we are facing many global challenges that affect us all as members of society. The ongoing societal changes also compel us to rethink and reflect our own identities. Men's experiences and reflections on identity and their role in society are keystones in the work to support men in their personal crisis. This webinar aims to answer the questions such as what is fundamental for any society to ensure that men are supported and empowered in crisis situations, and how does the crisis in manhood manifest itself in today's society. And to answer these questions today, we have professionals from Norway, Sweden and Finland, and the opportunity to learn from practical work they do with men in crisis in their countries.
And now we can move to the program, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Carl Brunel is a psychologist who has been working with men and writing about the work with men for several years. In his work, Carl has addressed various topics from masculinities to migration, from sexualities to violence. Today, he'll be speaking to us about the work in Manscentrum, Men's Center in English. Manscentrum is a private foundation that has been providing psychological support to men in crisis situations since 1988. The crises that men go through can take many forms, as well as the needs men have in such situations, as we will hear today. So, Carl, welcome. I'll give you the floor now.
My name is Carl Brunel. I'm a clinical psychologist. So I've been working with patients in acute crisis for 15 years now, complex traumatized children and youths, newly arrived LGBTQ migrants, and in recent years, men at the crisis center. And today I want to talk about this last group, men in crisis. It's a group I've grown deeply committed to. I brought a patient with me to help me describe my work, not in flesh, but in story. Peter, as I call him, is fictional, yet assembled from the lives of real men I've met in therapy. He will help us explore the difficult social and psychological terrain that men in crisis navigate. A quick note on the slides, you've seen them all. They're very few and they're abstract by design. Treat them as surfaces of your free-floating attention, as Freud would have it, rather than a source of concrete data. And we can look at the first slide now. So if we can just change it. Yeah, that's it. So in a text by the art critic and author John Berger, he described this French artist Théodore Géricault's relationship with his models. And around 1820, Géricault painted a series of portraits of inmates at the Salpêtrière Asylum for Women in Paris. And when you look at the portraits, you soon realize that Géricault wasn't interested in diagnosis or clinical labels. On the contrary, every brushstroke testifies to the fact that he knew his subjects intimately. He could call them by their true names, so to speak. And a few decades earlier, Goya had painted scenes of asylum inmates, chained and naked, the picture on the right there. And for Goya, it was their actions or behaviors that were at the center, not their inner selves. And these two ways of painting remind me that my patients, well, and possibly the world as a whole, can be viewed from two very different perspectives. So at times today, I'm going to talk about men, and at times I'm going to be very close to a patient of mine. To his inner life, I will surely remember his name. And at other times, I will observe my patient group from a great height, where individual facial expressions can't be perceived, sweeping opinions about the patient group as an anonymous crowd, perchance. But I will begin by stepping in close, like Géricault, as I introduce you all to my patient, Peter. And we can take the next slide, I think. So Peter is a 40-year-old man with a fit body, a day's worth of stubble, glasses very much like mine. He has roots in the forests of Värmland, that's in the west of Sweden. And though he spent half his life in Stockholm, you can still catch traces of his origin, a faint melody in his voice, and a certain lightheartedness that at least I associate with his particular place of origin. Early in our conversation, he laughs easily. This, of course, is a great strength, access to humor and such. But the cheerfulness covers parts of Peter that needs to surface and be tended to. Peter works as an engineer. He's got 2 children. He's been married for 11 years. Always punctual. He gives off a very intelligent impression. The first time he walks into the clinic, his hair is windblown. His cheeks are flushed, like he's just returned from a spontaneous hike in the national park. But once in the therapy chair, it's very clear that he's deeply lost. Sweat stains soon appear on his shirt. He's uncomfortable, I can tell. And quite understandably so. In therapy, you're expected to put feelings into words, expose your vulnerability, ask for help, admit that you're in a mess, in a muddle that you can't get out of on your own. You don't always know where the conversation will lead, so you'll have to let go of some control. And this stands in stark contrast with how Peter had been taught a man is expected to behave. So it's not without some difficulty that he describes in the first session he's been acting badly towards his life. He's hiding in these kind of generalizations, acting badly. I need him to be specific. So what did you do when you were acting badly? Peter tells me he'd always taken pride in his direct manners. If he saw something he didn't like, he spoke his mind, and this applied to family life too. But there were other sides to that directness, an aggression, speaking loudly, demanding to be heard. He could get forceful at times, sometimes even quite offensive. It happened that he threw a mobile phone on the floor, a plate or a pen across the room and agitated. And this past weekend, his wife finally had enough. A conflict again erupted over some petty detail, how to wash fresh coriander, which part to discard. And Peter had at one point taken the whole spice and threw it down the bin, then left the kitchen. Later that night, his wife said she wanted to divorce him. He couldn't believe it. And so I drew this diagram. Let me see if you can look at it. So for Peter, he'd been acting out repeatedly through his life. He described them as small dents. He really liked this, by the way. He was an engineer, so he kind of liked the what is this called? The image here. So over his life and in his family, he'd been acting out, sometimes violently, sometimes less violently so. But every time he acted out, represented by these dents here, or these holes that he stumbled into, he climbed up quite fast and then returned to sort of his normal life. Then he fell again a while later and again, always climbing up to his, continuing his life as normal. He didn't really talk about these situations with anyone. And he was happy that he managed to get out of it. For his wife, on the other hand, her process was very different. When he fell down a hole, so did she. But every time he fell, she fell further down. And so her process looked a bit like that. Now, it was acting out on this petty detail with the coriander, represented this little dent here. And he couldn't believe he'd been acting out much more violently in the past, and all of a sudden she wants to divorce him. Well, that's the reason. All of these times he fell and never repaired the damage he did to the relationship, further created a rift between them. So over here, they started having physical intimacy, and over here, finally, she decided they needed a divorce. The real crisis for Peter came with this threat of separation. It completely knocked him off balance. He's unsure if the relationship will survive. He realizes he's damaged his most important attachment, the bond in which he was supposed to provide safety and in which he was supposed to feel safe. Losing control over matters that over things that matters most triggers his threat system. By crossing boundaries, his self-image has taken a major hit. He's consumed by shame and self-loathing. He's losing control over what matters most in life. And this triggers his threat system. Peter, in one sense, regresses to a more primitive state as intense stress shuts down the brain's higher cognitive functions. This leads to fixations, poor decisions, and terrifying projections about the future. In one way, he can't even imagine a life is possible without his marriage. He struggles to sleep, work, eat. He's overwhelmed by anxiety. And the crisis in itself, losing control, needing others, feeling weak, also clashes with his masculine identity that was shaped during his upbringing. And in his darkest hours, the suicidal impulse sprouts, pale and deadly. Or, if one prefers to put it in a more elegant word, here by Harry Martinson from Aniara, Peter stands with one leg drowned beneath a search of feeling, the other braced by feeling dead and gone. In short, Peter's unable to navigate this new reality with any kind of adaptive strategies. His old ways are no longer working, and so he falls. Now, from my perspective as a therapist, the ability to break down is quite desirable. Something opens up in Peter, a crack, where new light can enter. I know that vulnerability is perishable, so it's time to get to work. But before we throw him into treatment, we need to, like Goya, raise our gaze and observe from a distance. Maybe say something briefly about our clinic. But I gotta say something about this beautiful artwork. As you noticed, I'm real bad at drawing, and so I'm using, what is it, world art to illustrate this case. And this, some of you may notice this from what's his name, Hokusai's The Wave. It's an earlier version of that more famous painting. I like it as an illustration of a crisis, being thrown out into open, violent sea, feeling scared, being afraid that the new reality will crush you. And yet, if you look closely further at the horizon, there is a hint of land, and also there are other boats thrown out into this violent sea. Anyways, we'll change the image to the next one. My most informative image about Manscentrum. It's a men's center located here in Stockholm. It's been around for about 30 years. We who work here are licensed psychologists and psychotherapists, and we use evidence-based methods to help men in crisis. Now, every year we meet about 400 patients, and over the years we've been in contact with around 18,000 men. Last year, about 250 of our patients seeked our help for violent behavior. And that's about half of all men in Sweden who voluntarily sought such help. Most of our patients are from Stockholm, but we also take patients online, nationally. Anyways, despite the fact that 50% of our current patients are perpetrators of interpersonal violence, we insist on calling ourselves a crisis center, and there are pretty good reasons for this. First of all, we believe a crisis center lowers the threshold for men to seek professional support. I'm not sure if anyone would ever come here if we would call it sort of the center of wife abusers or anything like that. So calling it a crisis center lowers that threshold, but it also adequately frame our work in the sense that we work with more or less functioning men who have stumbled into a situation, a relationship, or a developmental phase that they find themselves unable to cope with. It also creates time limit. This is not a place for long-term psychotherapy. Crisis is short, and we provide short-term treatments. One of the requirements we have is that men need to contact us on their own. We do not accept any kind of referrals. And that means they have to be sufficiently motivated for treatment. I also make sure that Peter gets his first appointment within a week. Motivation to treatment is fragile, and we must ensure rapid intake. Cannot afford to keep a queue. We can take the next slide. Oh, sorry. Yeah. And the next again. Thanks. That's it. As practitioners, of course, we always matter to our patients. But in times of crisis, I think that importance grows. We become, so to speak, a lighthouse in the storm, a beacon of hope. Psychologically speaking, we serve as temporary attachment figures, a safe haven. And unlike other therapies, I try to guide my patients quite actively, offering advice. Peter leans on me heavily, and I'm surprised to see he's applying what we discuss in therapy. He's starting quite soon to take care of his body, reconnecting with loved ones, re-establishing daily routines, allowing himself time to grieve and to reflect. And maybe most importantly, truly listening in to his wife, especially the more painful experiences she has endured during their marriage. In therapy, Peter must turn his attention inward, toward what he can actually control, namely himself, his needs, his emotions, and away from a world that is mostly chaotic and beyond our control. And I drew him this picture. Let me see if I can make it for you. So this is Peter. This is the world. His life has taught him to keep his focus and his attention, maybe even trying to control the outer world. his wife, his kids, and earlier in his developmental history, his parents who were abusive, and his mother who suffered from poor mental health. But this, he has done that with a high price, namely he has forgotten, or he hasn't been able to keep a focus on himself, his emotions, his desires, his needs. And so in one way, our therapy is to stop him trying to control or focus the world, which he doesn't really have any mandate to control or to, observe that long, and use that control, that focus on himself, his inner world, so to speak. He's grown up in quite frightening environments with adults who never really helped him with his emotional regulation. And as a result, he's easily thrown off balance. In psychology, we talk about window of tolerance, that zone in which we feel regulated, safe, relaxed, and where interesting stuff can happen. We can fall in love or be creative or be good professionals. But Peter is easily thrown off that zone into hyper activation, irritability, worry, anxiety, acting out, or into what we call hypoactivation, withdrawal, depression, and safe hatred. And so we have to broaden his window of tolerance by offering him strategies to help himself. These must be taught and practiced in therapy. So in practical terms, I help him regulate until he can do this on his own. We work with breath work, guided meditation, and stop techniques. Towards the end of the treatment, we look further back. First, to his father who drank too much and could become violent. Later, to his mother suffering from recurring depressions. Peter could describe quite violent scenes from his childhood home, scenes which in a way is now repeating in his own family. This, of course, isn't an excuse, but it's the beginning of an explanation. And this part of Peter, which he has struggled to keep hidden from himself and from others over the years, it evokes a tenderness and caring feelings in me. We talk about the child that still exists in Peter, the one who reacts so strongly in conflicts, without his will having time to intervene when there's a threat of separation. How does that child feel? How can it be comforted? And most importantly, how can Peter guide it forward, so to speak? One sentence keeps returning to Peter: what would an adult do? And an adult, would both agree, would spend time trying to repair the relational damage done. And I guide him through that process of what the proper excuse entails. Peter's treatment is intense. We meet weekly at first, with longer intervals towards the end, but it's not particularly long term. After 12 sessions, it's time to say goodbye. Peter and his wife have started marriage counseling, and I don't know what's going to happen in their counseling, if they're going to find the path back to each other, or just find a space in which they could navigate their separation under a bit calmer circumstances. Through a colleague who's responsible for the contact with his wife, I hear she notices a clear change in him. Peter can also put this into words. He no longer feels as fragmented. His story is more coherent. Any blow in life will have longer lasting and more serious consequences if there's no opportunity to talk about it and to express to other people emotions about the event and those involved in it. Also importantly, to experience the presence of socially connected others who will not let one go through it alone. What we at Manscentrum and at most crisis center, I'm sure, aim at is undoing the aloneness of the crisis, as Diane Forsua puts it. Poet and activist Audre Lorde wrote, "I've come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood, that the speaking profits me beyond any other effect. If the crisis is shrouded in silence, if you're left alone on that stormy sea, there's a good chance it will find other paths into psychopathology. It will resurface as violence, illness, or fear. But spoken and shared, as we do in this very room, pain can begin to settle in the past. Or, to finish off with Shakespeare from Macbeth, give sorrow words, the grief that do not speak whispers the overfraught heart and bids it break. Right, that's it. Next slide, and I hope it's a slide with a cute kitten. That's it. And I'm afraid I don't really know if we take questions now or if we save it for later, but that's it from me.
Thank you, Carl, very much for a very, very interesting presentation and the description of the approach that you take when it comes to short-term therapy and counseling. I think your concept that you have in Manncenter is really interesting, and I wanted to know if how do men find your services? You mentioned that you don't take any referrals, for example, and I think you have a small fee against your services. How do men find you?
Well, I think we like to take pride in our, homepage or in our connections with police authorities and social authorities. But in general, I think there's a rumor going that we can provide good help. And I think these 18,000 men that we've helped throughout the years are our biggest advocates in that sense. A lot of the people coming here, they come because of friends or family members who'd already come here. We do, what's that called? We do a lot of educational work, and we also do some media work at times. And I think that also helps bring in patients. But for us, it's never been a problem. We have about 10 to 20 people calling us each week. So we never really had that as a problem. And it's true, the fee here is about 30 euros. That's highly, what's that called, subsidized. We rely heavily on grants and on money provided from government and municipality and health services.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl, and we'll be going forward with our program. Our next speaker will be Are Sastad, who is a Norwegian author, gender equality activist, and expert on men's issues. Since 2012, he has been in charge of Reform, Resource Center for Men. He published in 2022 book Usynlige män, Invisible Men in English, that challenged the conventional notions of gender equality in Norway and shed light on areas where boys' and men's unequal position is still not recognized, for example, fatherhood and care, breakups, health, the gender-segregated education and labor market, and violence and exclusion from society. Today, Are is here to tell us more about the work Reform has been doing for all these years with men, and he will tell us about the change the Reform has brought about in Norwegian society. Are, please, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Jonas, and also Taina. Very pleased to be invited to this very interesting webinar. The title of my presentation is, as you see, How to Target Men in a Situation of Crisis. I have put the word crisis in singular, not the plural crisis, because I understand my topic to be about the male crisis as so, not the many societal crisis. But of course, the crisis we all face when it comes to attacks on democracy, climate change, and global inequality is a most threatening background for understanding also the male crisis on the crisis or the crisis of manlyhood. Next slide, please. Well, this is, and also next, please, and I get the text up. This is my, well, it's some animation here. This is my crew, Reform Resource Center for Men. We are a non-profit NGO, started in 2002. We are situated in Oslo. We are one of 5 gender equality centers in Norway, but we are also the only one with a main focus on boys and men's situation and boys and men's gender equality issues. We have a core funding by the state, the Ministry of Culture and Equality in Norway, and we are 8 employees. One of those are also a therapist, and we do also have a volunteer men's helpline, a telephone helpline that has actually been going on since the 80s. Next slide, please. In a way, we can say that the modern man is in a constant state of crisis. It's a history of constant change going on nowadays and for the last century or so. We have had women's liberation. I lost my presentation there. Well, I can, well, yes. We have had women's liberation that demands for another type of man. And that makes a huge contrast between the family values we expect men to take and go into, and also still do working place success, have a career. Still, men as a breadwinner, supporting the family with the funds and money and so on, is on a receding front. And we also have seen the last decades that men lose positions in education, politics, business, academia, and have been supposed to applaud that things. At the same time, we have extremists that claim that you should be a man, you should stand up for yourself, you should be tough, you should be hard. People like Andrew Tate and other influences. So it's not easy. The changes are wanted when we come to women in positions that is changes that are wanted in politics, something that has general support across the political spectrum, and most needed answer to women's historically oppressed situation, of course. We want women to take part, to share power, and to take on a leading position in society. At the same time, our notion of being a man hasn't changed by far as much as our notion of a modern woman. Whilst women's position is rapidly changing, change is much more slow when it comes to men, when it comes to what we understand as masculinity. This creates a huge dilemma for men, both being expected to support the equality project and at the same time be tough, work longer hours, not cry, not complain. I would say this forms a clear basis for the crisis in manlyhood. Next slide, please. What should be our starting points? Well, we have to include boys and men in the concept of equality and in equality policy. We must understand men's situation without being prejudiced. We must aim to help, not condemn men. We should offer a different framework of understanding, a different framework from Andrew Tate and others like him that encourage hatred and gender segregation. We should encourage standing together and gender the opposite of gender segregation. I couldn't find the word now. Next slide, please. It's important to understand, to remember that men are not to be blamed for being born in the wrong gender. We cannot choose our parents. We don't choose our gender. We are born into the world as a gender, and today's men cannot be accused for injustices against women in previous times. What have been done in historical times to oppress women isn't the role of men today, and can't be held accountable for that. Men in general are not the main cause of women's oppressed situation. And the last sentence here is very important to underline. So next slide, please. Because if we see class versus gender, we see that social inequality and class affiliation are a lot more important for quality of life than gender is. Differences based on education and income are far greater between men than between women and men as a gender or as groups. This is very important because if we look at men with the highest income and highest education and also look at the men in the bottom of society, without income, without education, the life expectancy, to take one point, is far greater between men on the top and the bottom than it is between women on the top and women on the bottom. So gender means less than class, and when it comes to which crisis you actually are in. Next slide, please. So what can we in civil society do? First and foremost, we have to recognize that what boys and men's problems are rooted in. Examples for that is when it comes to fatherhood, health, feelings, and sexuality, and violence. And I will use these three examples now. Next slide, please. When it comes to fatherhood, fathers are not followed up like we do with mothers. We expect men to be fathers, to go into family, to take family responsibilities, to raise children, but we do not follow up like we do like mothers. For instance, the municipal health centers, and I'm not now talking about Norway, I know it's some differences between the Nordics, they should provide equal services to all parents, but they don't. And in Norway, we have tried out a project with promising results on this. The project is called an Equal Health Center, where we trained professionals in the municipal health centers to offer talks with fathers in the same way that is being done with mothers. They did screening of depression, mental health, and mastering of the parenting role. It was in fact inspired by a Swedish program for following up fathers. We've done this in a municipality in Norway, and I had also done it in several others afterwards. And the results is beneficial both for the fathers themselves, but also for the caring for the children and for the mothers, for the whole family actually. We also see that such talks are very important very important tools to show that fathers are responsible and capable for children in early age, and also for following up their parenting responsibility later on in the children's lives. Next, please. When it comes to health, feelings, and sexuality, we know that men have fewer near ones to talk about emotional problems with. Men connect more seldom with others to talk about severe problems in their lives. Men also go much less often to the doctor than women do, and die a premature death. The life expectancy of men in Norway is about 3.5 years shorter than for women in average. But as I pointed out recently, the difference is much bigger when you also take in the class factor. We also know that boys do not seek out the municipal health centers for use and doesn't learn their body signals. So, and when it comes to the municipal health center for use, we know that boys have to be met in a different way than girls if we want them to seek help. Experiences show that separate opening hours, allowing boys to attend at other times than girls, is effective. Places that have tried this out get a much higher percentage of boys. By doing so, boys in trouble can be met at an earlier stage, preventing minor problems to grow into severe problems, and therefore also bettering the lives of boys. The same results are to be seen in other parts of the healthcare system. When opening up for men to attend alone or in male groups, they actually take the services into use. If not, men as users will be more seldom, and their health situation will not be met in ways needed or satisfied in ways needed. So the healthcare system must be gender sensitive to men. We have had a long growing understanding of the need to see women's health issues as a gender sensitive issue in the healthcare system, but we haven't done so in the same extent when it comes to men. Next slide, please. When it comes to violence, we know that men exposed to violence rarely visit shelters and carry trauma longer than women do. The crisis centers or shelter houses must show that they also exist for men. We have been advising crisis centers on these matters for many years with notable results in statistics. In the project Men Also, we have given guidance to professionals at around 50% of Norwegian crisis centers in how to facilitate for a service that also suits men. Even if the centers have been open for all genders since the Norwegian law on crisis centers in 2010, male victims of violence seldom use them. In fact, most men don't even know the centers are there for them. Sadly, this also goes for a lot of municipal workers. Because of this, it is crucial that the centers themselves are aware of how they inform about the service. And of course, that the service given to men is of the same quality as the service given to women. This is often not the case at all. Today, due to many years' work, a shift in attitude is taking place in Norway. This may also lead to a change in the legislation so that men and trans persons are treated more equal. Next slide, please. This is a quote from Bob Dylan, as you know. The times they are changing. The trend has long been that women are gaining ground more than men, such as when it comes to school dropouts, completed higher education, and positions of power of society. And as put out earlier, this is a wanted politic. But the political shift globally now threatens both women's equality and equality as a value. What we must understand is if women lose, men lose. And if men lose, women lose. And of course, all minorities will lose. Next slide, please. So what should be done on a political level? We still think of equality as something that only applies to women. That has to change. The welfare state must not close the door to men, even if we don't like them or what they say or how they behave. The solution is to stand together, men, women, and minorities. This demands at least as much from the women's movement as from men themselves. If we don't include men as allies in the fight for gender equality and a just society for all, but still sees them as enemies, I fear we are facing a serious pushback. A lot of men in crisis will more or less rightfully feel that the welfare state doesn't belong to them because it doesn't see them and their needs. This may result in really serious societal crises where the general support of the fragile system of the Nordic welfare state, which still is strong, are at risk. Next and last slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Are. We have a few questions for you. We have a few minutes more than supposed for this. So the first question from the audience is that how can we work towards equality so that we are not framing this as just a gender issue, but so that we can talk about both class and gender and other issues at the same time without alienating some of the participants in the discussion or people working towards equality and welfare. How have you worked towards these issues?
It's a big question, Jonas, but as I said, I think taking men's issues into more serious account, actually changing politics so that gender equality is understood like a value that applies to us all, is the most important thing, I think. As you know, we have been working in reform for many years to make a shift, and we still see quite a lot of obstacles to fully understand this. And when we know how Trump and his allies doing what they're doing in the world and pushing back what we can call the civil society duties and free speech and not at least gender equality, we could hope that standing together against this would be easier. I hope that is the case, that the women's liberation and the men's liberation can go along with also minorities' liberation, that we can stand together to gain a more just society, or to put it more rightly, actually defend the welfare state as such, because it is at stake. It's not. We are an island in the top of Europe and in the world, and what you are doing here is very interesting, because this is an example of how the world could be thinking. But at this point of time, it's most important, I think, that we stand together to defend the value of social equality and gender equality, and that at least is not is a challenge for what I would say the gender equality states in the Nordics. That still has a way to go to fulfill this when it comes to including boys and men. In Norway, we had the Men's Equality Commission. I was a part of that. We handed out our report a year ago and gave a lot of recommendations to the Norwegian government how to actually change politics. So I think in 2 days or so, it's 1 year ago since we launched the report. So far, we haven't seen much change. So we are eager to see this, and to see that we actually are able to stand together to fight back the pushback.
Yes, and what you're talking about here is it's important to be in the vanguard. Even the Norwegian numbers that you are discussing about life expectancy and so on, they would be something that we, even in Finland and Baltics, should strive for. So your example is important. Another question from the audience. What do you mean by men in general not being the main cause of women's oppressed situation?
I mean, today's men, I understand the question. I mean that how society is, I mean, the notion of patriarchy is, in my understanding, not a very useful word in the Nordics. There are still obstacles for gender equality for women, of course. Many fights to still take on, but when it comes to the real great societal problems that are threatening us, and also the gender equality issue, it isn't the common man that is the problem for the common woman. And as I put it out, I said before, we have a very small elite on the top of the society that is mostly consisting of men still, in the academics, in the business, and in the media, even if women are taking positions also there. But we often compare that small minority of elite men with the great group of women. and compare them as if men on the top are the same as men as a group, and that's not the case. For even if men are on the top, they also are on the bottom of society. Men are in all the negative statistics outnumbering women, like in violence, in crime, in drug abuse, alcohol abuse, in suicide, in accidents, and a lot of other very not good statistics to be in. So these men are not the threat for women's liberation. These men are to be seen as allies, together with a great group of men that are working class and middle class men that are supporting the gender equality project. Men are supporting the gender equality project in the Nordics still. But this is also at stake if you don't see the major problems facing the less fortunate groups of men in the bottom of society. And that is a male group. In the Norwegian prisons, I'm sure it's the same in the rest of the Nordics, 95% of inmates are men. 95. So this is really huge numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. And last question for you. There are several questions about this. Do you have any tips on how to engage men in gender equality? How to bring about the men as agents of change into the discussion so that their voice will be heard, but at the same time it will be beneficial for all?
Well, a lot of men are supporting gender equality for women. And that has been the role of men, supporting the gender equality project for women. And I think most men still will do that. But it is also important that men recognize the gender equality politics as something that actually is also important to them as persons. I mean, if you don't see a state that is supporting you in your problems, it's very important to be solidarity, to show solidarity with groups that also have problems, but when you're not included yourself at any point of time. So I think it's important to understand that gender equality and the fight for gender equality has to include men, both as supporters of women's liberation and also as active agents for themselves. It's a good thing to stand together with women to make structural changes also for men. The father's quota is the best example of that in the Nordics. I mean, the Nordic father's quota is a revolution in how men actually have been given a possibility to be active fathers, use their compassion and feelings to go into the family issues in a way that was unspeakable for 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So we can make change if you take men on board.
Well, thank you, Orre. Hopefully we can follow up on this discussion in the end of the program. But as promised, we will have a small break now, break of 5 minutes, and we'll be back online after that with our final presentation and discussion session. So I'm looking at the time, 13:54, but okay, let's make it to 13:55. So we'll come back at 2 o'clock exactly. So see you soon. Welcome back. We will continue now with our third presentation. We have here in the studio Tuomo Perälä and Jussi Pekkola from Miessakit, Finland. The focus of the third presentation is on men who have experienced violence. Tuomo and Jussi come from the Finnish NGO Miessakit that has been working with male perpetrators of violence since 1990s. And since 2016, their focus has expanded to also working with male victims of violence or survivors of violence. So now we have the opportunity to learn about the crisis work Miessakit is doing with men who've experienced different types of violence and about male-specific approach to working with male victims of violence. So Tuomo and Jussi, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Taina. My name is Tuomo Perälä, and indeed I work as a counselor here in Miessakit ry's service, where we support men who've experienced violence. And we have 2 employees in this service, and here's Jussi Pekkola, my colleague, who will present himself shortly. But first, couple of words about my background. I worked in this service for a little bit more than a year now. And before that, I worked I was supporting victims of crimes in another NGO and did crisis work in crisis centers, and was also helping people who have tried to commit suicide. So my background is in crisis work, and I have a bachelor's degree of social services. Jussi.
Okay, and I have been working in these current jobs since the beginning of the service, 2016. And before that, I was working in the Helsinki University Trauma Center and the adult psychiatric ward for more than 10 years, and a couple of years in sexual health clinic. And my background training is psychiatric nurse and sexual health counselor. Thank you.
And our presentation we will divide. I will talk first, and then after me is Jussi. So our aim is to give you key points of our work and service, and our observations of the topic of today. Maybe first, few facts about the service. So we offer counseling for adult men who've experienced violence, any kind of violence, domestic violence, or violence in the streets or in public. Our counseling is done face-to-face in our office or via Teams or phone across the nation. And it's important to note that it's indeed counseling, so we are not therapists and we're not giving therapy. Due to the restrictions from our funding party, which is the state of Finland, we can only have max, on average, 5 sessions per man. So while our work consists of individual counseling and guided peer groups that are also done face-to-face or via Teams, there are thematic 10-session peer groups, but altogether this is the support that we can offer to the male victims of violence. Over the years, since 2016, we've supported 842 men in individual counseling, so a little bit more than 3,300 sessions with those men. And in addition to those, we've had 2,700 anonymous one-off help sessions. And this can mean that it's a phone call from a man, single call, or it can be a consultation from a professional, or quite often also a relative or friend who's concerned of man's situation. Our service is free of charge for everyone, and maybe important thing to note is that 85% of our clients, the men, have experienced domestic violence, and only 15% have experienced violence on the streets. Typically, the men that we meet, that we counsel, are educated, they are employed, and they've been in a heterosexual relationship. And as our work mainly concentrates on domestic violence and more specifically intimate partner violence, that's the key points, or that's our focus in our presentation also today. The men come in the middle of crisis. Their physical well-being, mental well-being is compromised. They might be losing their job. Their economical status is poor. They might be in the middle of divorce. They might be might have legal cases ongoing regarding experienced violence or divorce or something else. So they come really with a big package to our counseling, and then we try to take a slice of that and help them. One thing the men say when they come to us, that nobody has, or quite often nobody has asked from them about the violence, or the violence that they have experienced hasn't been taken seriously enough by authorities or in other services, and that's how they ended up in our service. We collect information anonymously from the men before the counseling, at the end of counseling, and after 6 months after the counseling. And here are the types of intimate partner violence that the men report. Psychological violence, 93% last year. And this is most difficult for men to recognize. And they say that it has been more damaging than the physical violence that they've experienced. Quite often this can be, of course, shouting, blaming, manipulating, but or also controlling man's behavior, social life, finances, appearances, fatherhood, many things. It can be also means using threats as a leverage, threats that the partner will hurt herself or hurt herself and then call the police and state that the man has actually been violent, or threats of divorce or taking the children, for example. It can also mean false reports to authorities that the man has been violent, or in the worst case scenario, also reports that the man has sexually abused their common children in a way to hurt the man. And even though the police investigation found no evidence of this kind of crimes, it can be very destructive for the man. And this can be also part of parental alienation, where the other parent tries to destroy or cut off the man from the child or destroy their relationship. Physical violence, very common also, 71% reported that last year. Shouting, spitting, throwing objects, slapping, pushing, hitting, even stabbing, strangling, suffocating. One form of physical violence that the men don't recognize that well is preventing man to leave from a conflict situation, which can also lead to a fight. Economical and sexual violence are the last two. Economical violence, also 45% of men reported that, and it can mean simply controlling a man's finances, for example, borrowing money, significant sums of money and not paying back, or using common funds without permission, or insisting that it is man's role to pay all costs in a family. The last, sexual violence, is the most difficult for men to bring up in our counseling, and it is it's difficult to talk about experienced violence, but it's more difficult to talk about experienced sexual violence. It can be ridiculing man's sexual competence, or comparing man to previous partners, or pressuring man to have sex, or forcing man to have sex. Linked to this, a little bit different type of violence can be also that it can be also lying about birth control if it has been agreed together that it is used. Our counseling is based on this 5-session model that you see on the screen. I'm not going into detail now here what it is about, but it's rooted in cognitive short therapy. I think the most important part of it in the beginning is to hear the man's story and believe the man and give space to his opinions and feelings. But as we progress, the most important parts of the model are to recognize the violence that the man has experienced, support the man to protect himself and his children if necessary, and understand that he can only change his own actions and reactions. He cannot change his spouse, for example. And the aim is to support the man's confidence that he can actually create a change by being more assertive and active in his situation and relationship. And we have a really strong focus on improving the man's well-being, and we try to help him to find ways to support his well-being also after our counseling. It's really short process that we have, and of course, as I said, the men come with a big package, so we always try to find other sources of help for the man within the Finnish society or in the other services, health services or social services or legal services to mention. Brief glimpse to our feedback from last year. We have had really excellent feedback throughout the 8 years. This is like a summary of last year's 6 months follow-up feedback. 93% of men reported that the violence has stopped or decreased, and 80% report that their well-being has improved, and 100% would recommend our service to another man who's in a similar situation. So the feedback has been consistently good over the years. But I will now hand out it to my colleague Jussi to highlight some specific features that we have found in our counseling over the years. Go ahead, Jussi.
Okay. Thank you, Tuomo. And one of the biggest problem that we have encountered in our client work is that the violence experienced by a man is downplayed. Also, the consequences of the violence is downplayed. It is downplayed by the man themselves, but also the friends, relatives, authorities might not recognize enough violence that men have experienced or do not ask or take the consequences seriously enough. Based on our client work, it also appears that the impact of the violence perpetrated by women on children's well-being may also be sometimes underestimated. It is worth consider whether protective mechanisms like supervised visits for children and restraining orders are used as effectively when a man or woman is suspect of violence. Man and lack of empathy, as it been said earlier today, that boys and girls have been raised very differently in the past. Boys have been taught less emotional skills, and in general, men are given less empathy than women when it comes for being victim of the violence. One reason for this could be that people feel a greater need to protect women and children, while the men are thought to be the ones who protect others as well as themselves. Difference in attitude is also seen in the media and popular culture, where it is still okay to laugh at a man who experiences intimate partner violence. Also, violence has been seen and is still seen as the part of boys' and men's lives. Consequences of this are still seen in today's society. Stereotypically, man is violent and a woman is victim. That is maybe why men do not receive sufficient empathy when they have experienced violence. Too often, it is thought man is somehow himself guilty for the experienced violence, and this may also leave the violent acts of the woman unrecognized and without the support they need. Also, we have noticed the difference between our work and our work, the men who are using the violence is that sometimes the woman perpetrators may have the partners committing violence with them. It can be the family members or friends or other parties that are supporting the violent acts or committing violence as against a man. One form of this are false reports to authorities against the man, which can lead to the unjust actions of authorities. It is still need to be justified why there is support for men who have experienced violence, and one reason maybe is that general public doesn't have the correct idea how common the violent experience of the man are in Finland. For example, at least 25% of the intimate partner violence in Finland is experienced by a man and 60% of all violence. The focus has been on violence experienced by a woman, and for good reason. In order for equal treatment to be achieved, it is also necessary to focus more on men's experience. Too often, men still try to solve the problems on their own and do not seek help early enough. Most men that we meet feel strong shame about experienced violence because they have not been able to defend themselves. They often feel that they have failed as a man and they must be the only ones who experienced violence committed by a woman. Consequences of violence many have also unjustified guilt that they have somehow caused the violence themselves. All this makes it more difficult for a man to seek help. We have found that our peer groups are an excellent way to reduce these feelings of loneliness, shame and guilt. And how has the service been received in our society? We have done this almost 10 years now, and mostly our service has been very well received. Since 2016, we have actively initiated cooperation with different non-governmental organizations and authorities via numerous meetings and seminars. The social debate regarding violence experienced by a man is more constructive now than it was 10 years ago. And also authorities recognize the intimate partner violence experienced by a man better right now than before. It has been understood that there needs to be service aimed directly at the man because service open to all do not reach man for one reason or another. In general, there is not enough research about violence experienced by a man and not enough services available that man feels are directed for them. Also, the man courage to speak about the violence they have experienced has been improved. Last year, the number of men reporting intimate partner violence to the police increased almost 10%. The Miessakit has already helped a man who used the domestic violence for 30 years. An association Good Reputation in Finland has helped us a lot in launching our service and cooperating with other parties. And what be in our focus that we are telling the media and in the lectures is basically talking about the man's stories about experienced violence and promote the help we offer for them. This aspect of intimate partner violence has received too little attention and the discussion still easily turns how often men themselves are violent or whose experience of the violence is most severe or consequences most harmful. Gender does not determine either factor. Finnish NGOs and other professionals have successfully transformed the understanding of parental alienation and use of children as a tool of domestic violence in the last 10 years. We've been one of the organizations working towards this goal. We brought into these discussions the male-specific elements this violence can have, as seen through the eyes of the men and professionals who contacted us through these years. The way our organization has persistently brought the issue to the public debate have played a significant role in societal change in Finland. Our service was the first focusing on helping only men who have experienced violence, and it has required hard work to come to this point, and there is still a lot of work to be done so that the men who need the support can find a place to talk. And that was our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuomo, and thank you, Jussi. And Jussi, please join us. Thank you. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I personally have a lot of questions for you, but I think we're going to take a couple of questions from the chat, at least to begin with.
Sure.
And we have a question in the chat saying, thank you, Jussi and Tuomo. Is this support model or similar to this used in other countries? Do you know if your counseling exists in, for example, in other Nordic countries or elsewhere?
In this model, not. So it's rooted in the cognitive short therapy, so that it does definitely exist in many other places. But the combination or exact similar counseling than ours it's not used in other countries because it's developed in our service.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I have to ask a question because I really your presentation was very interesting. I think you painted a pretty grim picture of the society when it comes to, for when men are being abused. And because you mentioned in your presentation that men are let down by their friends, family, society, also authorities and social services, so that the violence that they have experienced is downplayed. But then again, you have received very good feedback from your counseling, but I think your counseling sessions only counts for it's 5 times. Am I right? So how do you follow up on this situation? How can you refer your clients to social services when there seems to be a lack of male perspective, male sensitivity when it comes to helping men who have been experiencing violence?
Because the people doesn't, as Tuomo told earlier, that even people who work with this topic, let's say in psychiatric or in jails, or they don't ask about this, have you experienced violence? They ask what you have done. And when the man comes to our service, he knows exactly what is the topic. It's on the name. We will talk and ask about what has happened to a man. And when he has an opportunity to tell, he will probably have more courage to speak out in other services.
Okay.
And also we try to motivate them and in a way that when they go somewhere, they trust that people, they are professionals and they are on your side. And if something happened and you are not satisfied how they treat you, then after the meetings, it's better to see what they can be doing. Can you take the contact the place where the man have been and ask why this happened in such a way that I feel that I wasn't heard in the right way.
And we like to do we do cooperation with all the social sector and the health sector, and also give lectures on the professionals how to meet the man who's experienced violence, and of course promote our service as well. So our emphasis is really on the cooperation, as Jussi said, with all the other parties involved in the Finnish society.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Jonas, would you like to carry on?
Well, we are going to go on to our last part of this webinar. We will be going forward to our discussion part, where we'll be meeting all our speakers, and we'll have about half an hour, and we'll be fielding the questions from the chat and questions that have been left unanswered. We'll try to bring out the questions that everyone can answer, so that no one will be left out from these questions. And Aare and Carl are online now, so we'll be fielding the questions. Would you like to begin, or should I?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Okay. We've been discussing agency and we've been discussing assertiveness. But these are masculine traits. And in your representations, every one of you was discussing these things and how these should be brought about in the men that you are meeting. And they should be given agency in discussions about equality. They should be given assertive means to avoid being victims of violence and just suffering for it. What are the ways that we can bring this idea of a positive agency and positive assertiveness into our society for men? Is this something that we should be working on with boys, or is this something that men should discuss amongst themselves? What are your ideas on this? Karl, would you like to begin?
I don't really know. I don't really get any proper associations when it comes to assertiveness or agency. I think in one part, given the chance to speak about your life, sharing your history, that in itself creates more assertiveness, maybe control over each individual patient. But more than that, I'm not really sure in which way my work can reinforce assertiveness or agency in general to men, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Are?
Yeah, I think that thank you all my co-speakers for very interesting presentations. I have to say at first. It was very interesting to hear Jussi and Tuomo talk about how you meet men that's exposed to violence in Finland. We actually do something of the same in Oslo, Norway. In Reform, and we have a therapist, just one, but he is working more or less in the same manner as you do, but also with other problems than violence. But what I see as a problem, a societal problem, when it comes to violence against men, is that is not seen as a gender equality problem in the same way as we look upon it if it was women exposed to violence. It's a kind of understanding that men's culture, men's behavior, men's culture is a violent culture, and if you are a man, if you are a boy, you are supposed to tackle it, and that makes it very hard just to seek help, but also to make understanding in society on this. I'm not sure if anybody has pointed this out, but when it comes to violence, to be a victim of violence in the society, and that's in Norway, and that's in Sweden, and in Finland, and actually all over the world, men are far more exposed to violence than women are. We don't understand that usually because we're just talking about gender-based violence and violence in closer relationships, but men are exposed to violence in a wide range of ways, not at least in wars. I mean, the men are the cannon feed. Men are dying on the fields in Ukraine and Gaza and other places that we follow on screen now. But we don't consider them as that much valuable as women are. When you're counting bodies in Gaza, for instance, you're counting children and women. Where are the men? Men are the most that dies in wars. And in our culture, when it comes to violence, we also expect men to hold out, and we underestimate the numbers. I will give another speaker place now, but I point out one more point that I'm sure my fellow speakers also are familiar with, and that is a big problem that's just a male problem when it comes to violence, and that is what we in Norway call for omsnuing. I'm not sure you have a good expression for that in English, but it's turning around the violence. So if a man is exposed to violence from a spouse, and that might be a female spouse, he is accused of being the violent person, and the police believes that. So when the spouse goes to the police after he has been beaten or what psychologically victimized or what is the matter, they tend to believe the spouse and not the victimized man. And that's a particular problem that comes down to, I think, how we see men as gender in our society.
Something that you see in your work in men who have experienced violence.
Definitely. Well, yes. Related to what Ari said, yes, that can also happen here. That the authorities don't believe the man's story about experienced violence, and they might tend to believe the woman's story, because, as you said, that would be the stereotype. And about the assertiveness and the agency, the men we meet, they might have, or quite often have, roots in their childhood, or they might have experienced violence in their childhood family, or their parents might have experienced from their parents, or they might also have previous violent intimate partnerships, or they might have experienced violence in the school. So our job is to restore that agency that they might have lost within that, during those experiences of violences, and give them the assertiveness they need to express themselves. And that can really mean basically just telling how it feels when you treat me like this. What do I don't want? What do I want? In the most simplified version. So then it's about connecting to your emotions and expressing those emotions, which are for many men is quite difficult, because they might be a little bit cut off here. They're just in the head. But this is like one part of assertiveness, and of course setting boundaries is another part, for example. But because we hear quite often that the man has suffered from violence for a long period of time, and it's like a bomb, and then acts violently after being treated violently for years and years. And this is what we want to prevent, of course, by restoring that assertiveness and agency before that happens.
Yes.
Yes.
Go on, Taina.
I think I'm looking at the chat, because we promised we'll give some airtime also to the comments and questions we get from the chat. And this is a question for you and Tuomo and Jussi. So it says here, I find your model interesting, even though, as you mentioned, there are challenges in recognizing violence against men. Old gendered stereotypes are still thriving. This is hurting everyone. 2 exclamation marks. Question, what is the attitude of the police in Finland towards men who have experienced violence? Do men get help from authorities? And I think I would actually like to extend it to all speakers today. But if Tuomo and Jussi, you start, and then we'll let Karl and Aare answer. Go ahead.
That's one of the big change that has happened in the last 10 years. When we started, there was a lot of men who've been contacting police, and they've been giving very bad feedback, or downplayed, or even laughed straight at the man's face. Did you really come to make a report about this minor violence that you have experienced? This was in the beginning kind of every week that we meet a man who have this type of experience, but that have changed a lot. Police have made some changes, and they've been getting more counseling, and they are more treating people more equal nowadays, or that's what we hear. We don't hear these horror stories about the man who have been encouraged to go to the police and then kind of getting more violence from the from authorities. This have changed in the 10 years.
So there is good news.
Yeah,
also.
there is
Yeah,
good news,
yeah.
and it's. I think the main reason is that there is enough space for talking about this topic from different angles. It's been basically before it's been focusing on a man who are using violence and women who are victims, and that of course effect of the police way of thinking. And of course when the police go the home and there is big fight going on, it is difficult task to know who is the person who is most violent or who should be locked down, because both persons can be very kind of yelling and shouting, and so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What about Carl or Are? Would you like to answer? Have you also detected a societal change in Sweden and Norway?
Yeah,
Carl,
should I go
would you?
fast? Yeah, I think there might be a similar change when it comes to these kind of attitudes in the police force in Sweden, and I know that because I worked closely with the police force a couple of years back. But in my previous line of work, for most part, we do treat and give trauma-focused treatment to victims of partner violence, men who are being victims to that. But when it comes, my feeling when it comes to these men is that they've seldom reached out to the police. In fact, the story and the experiences are so well hidden in them that they can even seek or reach out for support without actually defining themselves that they've been living under very violent circumstances, sometimes even extremely violent circumstances. And so they come here for pains or some vague reason that there's a lot of stress in the relationship. And as you start to poke on that stress, all of a sudden a history of extreme violence rises to the surface. But that also means that they haven't really been able to identify themselves and then gone to the police, at the moment of the first hit. Many of our patients, they've been living under quite terrible circumstances for years and decades. But when it comes to, and I think that's really important, I was happy to hear my colleagues describe it, that shift in police attitudes as well, because I think it's a very important part of our job to uphold a firm trust in the system, whether that system is the police or the social authorities, sort of to contrast or contradict those more or less groundless ideas of paranoia, preventing individual men from getting the help. I mean, sometimes what's that called? The threshold is very much embedded in the men's emotional life themselves. So they uphold these ideas that police won't believe me or the social authorities won't believe me. And I think it's a part of our job to really reinforce that trust. Yeah, you will be believed, which is usually the case once they actually go to the social authorities or to the police.
Carl and
I
Are,
think,
would you like to follow up?
Yeah, I totally agree with Carl. I think that was very well put. I don't have the statistics for police behavior in Norway, but we have the same understanding that things are changing, things are happening. But I would point out that there are some differences also geographically. I mean, the center periphery line is also important here. It's more difficult in small communities to stand out as a victim or to be different than in big societies like as a big city. And we also see that the police and also the healthcare system is more trained to deal with things like this, more seldom things like violence against men and rape against men than in a small community. So I think it's down to culture in the local police force and the local community. There are a lot of communities around Norway that is taking this very seriously. We have a program, a state finance program for municipalities to take part in anti-violence program that's also focusing on men, vulnerable groups like minorities also. And in that municipalities, the level of knowledge is much higher in others. So things can be done. And of course, we shouldn't higher the threshold for men to speak out, but we also know that men that take contact with less educated helpers may risk getting a laugh, as Jussi also told us. If you are exposed to violence from a small spouse, a female spouse, and you are yourself, you are a big man, some places we still hear about that will be met with more or less laughs, and you should handle this. She's half your size, and so on. But I think we are on the right track.
Thank you. And we'll go back to the questions asked a bit earlier. Carl, this was for you. When you are specifically meeting men and bringing about services for men, what makes your approach different from meeting women in those services? How should the masculinity be addressed in the work, and what is male specific in the work?
Right. I'm not actually sure. When it comes to my treatments, they're very, very similar when it comes to men and women. As soon as you're in treatment, like my trauma-focused work will look more or less the same for women and for men. My crisis work will be more or less the same. But I think there's something about that first contact, the idea that you have to lower the threshold for men who are unused to looking for support for themselves. You need to lower that threshold. And our way of doing it is formally by having only men as psychotherapists and psychologists. Every time I think about it, I have a lot of difficulty trying to explain that to me. But on a practical level, it seemed to work. And a lot of my patients sort of appreciate the fact that a man is the one picking up the phone. So that first contact, I think it comes down to the first minute or so. And I notice myself as a clinician, I really try to tune in, what's that called, dialectically and language-wise to my patients. In one way, I also think that I am a bit more open as a therapist, joking maybe about the last night's game or about where I might live, stuff like that I wouldn't really do in other therapies. So that openness creates a bit deeper trust that I think men need to have in order to sit down in the chair behind me with enough comfort and enough openness. So there's something about those first 5 minutes that are important, but in general, I don't think it really matters to sort of do I don't know what sort of a trauma-focused, male-oriented psychotherapy would look like, but I do know what those first 5 minutes would look like when it comes to maybe men or women.
Thank you. And how about when you're working with violence? What are your thoughts on this?
I think it can be that many men, they need to talk first about concrete actions, what has happened, what has led to this violent behavior, before going to talk about the emotions. When I've been working with a female, it's kind of more fast track for what are the consequences of the violence on your emotions. Not like the men, they need to first to talk about actual what has happened. And something about the trauma-orientated work that I would wish to change in a culture is that people still sometimes think that men are not traumatized in the same way than the women are. I don't see that gender makes some kind of safe harniska.
Harness.
Yeah, for the man. It probably just make the man downplay what violence have caused. The man will not tell directly about what has violence caused to him.
I'll add that according to our feedback, for the men that find our service, appreciate that the employees are all men. So it seems to be a very important factor for the men that we counsel with Jussi, and I think it definitely lowers the threshold of the contact and coming to us and reaching out to us for some who have experienced violence from a woman. But if you look at the work per se, because I worked with women as a crisis counselor before, it is quite similar.
Thank you. And Aare, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Well,
What is
I'm
the
not
main
a therapist.
specificity here?
Is it
Go on.
my feedback? No, I don't know. I'm not a therapist, even if I am a trained nurse, like you see. But I agree that the problems men are dealing with are not fundamentally different from women's. But seeking help is very different, and also I think Carl has a good point. There would be nice that more men could meet a male therapist when showing up for help. This has to do with the gender segregated labor market, of course. And in Norway now, I think about 90% of students in psychology actually are female now. So we are going against a society with almost no men as psychologists, if you see some decades ahead. And that same goes for doctors. And we have no big shift in professionals in the healthcare system either, or in the educational sector. So what men meet is mostly women in all these areas. I am the first to say that I'm sure that women are experts and can do exactly as much as men can, but there is important that you meet someone you can lend your trust to, and in some cases that would be a man rather than a woman. And to meet persons like Carl, you see two or more here, is quite seldom if you turn up in the healthcare system in Norway. I think that is a problem that has to be dealt with on a societal level when it comes to gender segregated labor market and also the education sector. So it's a big task, but it's important also in a healthcare perspective.
Thank you, Aare. I think it was interesting what you all mentioned, that to some extent, when it comes to the short-term therapy of the council itself, the needs pretty much, I understand, are the same for male and female, for women and men victims of violence. But at the same time, you need to apply a gender-specific approach. I think because of the society, the attitudes, and also what the man himself thinks about the violence and his role in society. I think that's very, very interesting. I think we'll move on. We have another question in the chat. How do you get your message to men to come forward for help? So how do you reach these men? And how far do you think gender stereotypes play a role in preventing men from seeking help, and how can this be addressed? It's quite a long question, so pick your favorite ones. Who wants to start? Maybe Tuomen.
I might try.
Tuomen.
Okay. Well, I lost your sound now, I think, but do you hear me? No.
Ari, did you hear the question?
I did hear the question, yes.
Yeah, I'll let you start.
Thank you. The last part of the question, could you repeat that, please?
Yes, I think, how far do you think gender stereotypes play a role in preventing men from seeking help, and how can this be addressed?
I think this is quite important for men not seeking help. And there's also this understanding that men are not capable of talking about feelings. That I think is also internalized in men themselves. We are not the one to speak about feelings. When you see, when you seek help at the healthcare centers in schools, and you do not do that if you're a boy, you don't learn to talk about your bodily issues or your feelings or your sexual issues. Girls do that. Girls go to these services and they talk to friends. Boys don't do that. They go to the doctor alone, not before they are 18 years old. They have to do that because they are because of the military. And when you don't do that, you don't get the experience of talking about these highly personal things. And when you don't have that experience, you don't have the words for it. You don't have you don't know how to behave in a conversation about inner feelings. And but men can talk about feelings. I'm sure my fellow debaters here are quite will agree upon that with me. If you get the possibility, if you get the training, if you meet a therapist that's actually interested in hearing what your feelings are, but then you have to go to the therapist and you have to meet the healthcare system. And I think the biggest challenge there is not on men, but on society itself, to meet men on a more appropriate way, so that men actually understand that this is for me also. It's not just female. It's not just female to talk about feelings. And if I do, I can actually handle it. I have a lot to say. I have thought about this all my life. I haven't got the possibility to get it off my chest. Now I can do it. I will talk for hours if you just give me the possibility.
And maybe Carl, would you like to follow up on this?
Yeah, I can say something very brief. It statistically seems to play a huge role when it comes to the amount of, when it comes to who comes in contact with the healthcare system. And it seems like the more aligned the man is with more traditional masculinity, the less probable it is for him to seek support. And this seems to apply both medical support and psychological support. So it's not just a matter of being unused to expressing your emotions or expressing that you're in a muddle you can't get out of your own, or the fact that you have to leave some control to the therapist. It seems to apply to all kind of healthcare issues. But what to do about it, I'm not, as a clinician, I'm less, what's that called, entitled to have any opinions on, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think that it really stereotypes play, as it have told before, a big role for man seeking help, but also it kind of affect how often professional ask, is the man in need of help? Both men, we need to ask more, can we get help somewhere, but also professionals should ask more often. Often is a man on a need of therapy or something, because under 16 years old boys are using more Kela therapy in Finland than girls, and then when we come to adults it turns upside down. Like women are using most of the Kela therapy, so I think it's both like stereotypes in a man and also the professionals, it kind of affects.
Tuomo, would you like to add something?
Well, there's the first question, the part of the question that how do the men find our service? Is Google is pretty high, and also word of mouth. And you know, if you translate our services name directly, it is men who have experienced violence. So if you Google man violence, you know, our service comes up really high. And this is actually not how it used to be back 8 years ago. It has really changed also in Google, but also the men talk among themselves, and I totally agree with my fellow colleagues here that the men do talk about feelings when there's possibility of that. And one signal of that from our feedback is that only 4% of the men who we get feedback from haven't told anyone about the violence they experienced. So the vast majority has talked to a friend or a professional, and from there they get the information about our service as well. So men definitely do talk, and definitely talk about emotions as well when there's a space for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, these were very positive words. As we're coming to the end of our webinar, and I think I want to now thank all the speakers. First of all, Tuomo and Jussi here, and also Carl and Are. Thank you very much for your presentations and your participation in the debate. But I also want to thank our participants online for the very active participation. I want to remind you that this event has been recorded, and it will soon be available on the website of the Council for Gender Equality. And before we close, I want to remind you of our third and final event of our webinar series, which will take place on the 21st of May. And the topic of our final event will be on men and gender equality policies. So please do not forget to register if you have not done so, and hopefully see you soon again. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.